The flowers cost $40,000. That was the first thing the wedding planner told anyone who asked. Ivory peonies flown in from the Netherlands. White orchids arranged by hand. Every stem placed at an exact angle, measured to the centimeter. The ballroom of the Grand Hyatt Seoul smelled like a garden that had never known rain. Clean, controlled, almost unreal. And that was the problem. Everything about this wedding felt unreal. 500 guests sat in gold-rimmed chairs, dressed in quiet wealth, the kind that didn't announce itself. No loud colors. No oversized jewelry. Just tailored silence and practiced smiles. Cameras from 3 different media outlets lined the back wall. Outside, black SUVs stretched along the boulevard for half a block. This wasn't a celebration. This was a statement. A merger dressed in white linen and soft string music. If you are watching this for the first time, welcome. This channel tells the stories that don't make the front page, the ones that happen behind closed doors, in quiet rooms, between people the world assumes have everything figured out. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay close. Because what you are about to witness is the kind of story that changes how you see power, love, and the price of waiting too long to tell the truth. At the front of the aisle stood Han Seo-jun. 34 years old. Dark suit. Posture like a man who had never once second-guessed a decision in his life. His family's name was on 3 hospital wings, 2 government buildings, and one of the largest private equity firms in East Asia. When he walked into a room, conversations didn't stop, they redirected. Not because he demanded attention, because he carried the kind of weight that reorganized the air around him. He was not smiling. Not the way a groom smiles. He stood at the altar with the stillness of a man waiting for something he already knew was coming. His jaw was set. His hands were clasped in front of him. And his eyes, dark, unreadable, were fixed on the back of the room where the doors had not yet opened. Beside him, his best man leaned in. "You good?" he whispered. Seo-jun didn't answer. The string quartet shifted into the processional. The doors opened. An Choi Min-hee appeared at the end of the aisle in a gown that had been designed over 7 months and fitted 12 times. She was breathtaking by any measure, tall, poised, moving with the precision of a woman who had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times. The guests exhaled. Someone near the back actually pressed a hand to their chest. But Seo-jun's expression didn't change. He watched her walk toward him the way a man watches something he has already made a decision about. Quiet. Final. Heavy with something that had no name yet. Min-hee reached the altar. She looked up at him and smiled, the exact smile she had practiced. Magnetic. Designed for the cameras. He looked at her. And in that moment, something passed across his face so quickly that only one person in the room caught it. The officiant opened his book. Seo-jun's right hand, the one hidden from the guests, closed slowly into a fist. Nobody saw it. But it was there. Because while every person in that ballroom believed this was the beginning of something beautiful, Seo-jun was already carrying the weight of something that had ended months ago. And the truth he had never spoken out loud was about to demand a voice. Right here. Right now. In front of 500 witnesses and 3 media cameras. The question is, what does a man do when he knows the woman walking toward him isn't who she pretended to be? The monitor flatlined at 11:47 p.m. Nobody panicked. That was the first thing you noticed about Dr. Zainab Okoye. The people around her didn't panic. They moved. Fast, sharp, deliberate. Because she had trained them to match her energy, and her energy never broke. Get me the cart. Push 2 of AP. Someone call radiology and tell them we are not waiting. Her voice was low. Not calm the way people get calm when nothing is wrong. Calm the way a pilot sounds when the engine is failing and they are the only one who knows how to land the plane. The trauma bay of Seoul Central Hospital smelled like antiseptic and urgency. Fluorescent lights buzzed above a man on the table, mid-40s, no ID on him when they brought him in, white shirt destroyed, 3 cracked ribs confirmed on initial scan, internal bleeding suspected in 2 locations. The ambulance crew had given him 11 minutes when they loaded him. That had been 9 minutes ago. Zainab had 2 minutes to make decisions that most doctors took 20 minutes to debate. She made 3 in under 60 seconds. First, She bypassed the standard hemorrhage protocol and called for a direct intervention that her attending had never seen done outside of a simulation. Second, she requested a surgical consult be physically present in the room, not on the phone. Third, she identified a secondary bleed that the imaging hadn't fully captured yet, based on the bruising pattern on the left side of his abdomen and the specific way his pressure was dropping. She was right on all three. The senior nurse on shift that night, a woman named Adeola who had worked trauma for 11 years, later told a colleague that watching Zainab work was like watching someone read a language nobody else in the room could see. 41 minutes later, the man was stable. Zainab peeled off her gloves at the sink, shoulders straight, expression unchanged. She had been on shift for 9 hours. She had 4 more to go. She picked up her chart, rolled her neck once, and started toward the door. She felt it before she saw it. A stillness behind her that didn't belong to the room. Not a nurse. Not a resident. The energy was different, contained, deliberate, the kind that came from a person used to occupying space without apologizing for it. She turned. A man stood just inside the doorway. Dark coat. No hospital badge. Posture like someone who had never needed a badge to go anywhere. He was looking at her with the kind of attention that wasn't rude and wasn't warm, just precise. Like he was calculating something. "You can't be in here," she said. "I know," he replied. "I won't be long." She studied him for exactly 2 seconds. "The man on the table, he works for you." It wasn't a question. "Yes," he said. "Then he is lucky." A pause that lasted longer than it should have. "I watched the footage from the Bay camera," he said. "You identified the secondary bleed before the imaging confirmed it." She tilted her head slightly. "You review trauma footage. Only when something worth understanding happens." Zainab looked at him one more time. This man in the dark coat who spoke like every word had been selected in advance, and then she turned back toward the hallway. "He will need 48 hours of monitoring. Someone from your team can speak to the charge nurse in the morning." She walked out. And Han Seo-jun stood in the empty trauma bay, watching the door she had just passed through, with an expression that, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't fully understand. He came back the next morning. Not to check on his employee, that had been handled before 7 a.m. by 2 members of his staff. He came back because he had a question he hadn't been able to stop thinking about, and Han Seo-jun did not tolerate unanswered questions. He found Zainab in the hallway outside the ICU, standing at a small window at the end of the corridor, holding a paper cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold. She wasn't looking at her phone. She wasn't reviewing charts. She was just standing there, watching the city below the glass. Early morning Seoul, gray and quiet, still waking up. He stopped beside her. She didn't look at him. "Visiting hours don't start until 9, she said. "I'm not here for visiting hours." She glanced at him sideways. "Then what are you here for?" "You made a call last night that isn't in any standard protocol I've seen documented," he said. "The secondary bleed. You called it before imaging confirmed it. I want to know how." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the window. Bruising pattern. Pressure drop sequence. The way he was guarding his left side, even unconscious. She took a sip of cold coffee without flinching. The body tells you things before the machines do. You just have to know what you're looking at. How long did it take you to learn that? 12 years. For countries. 2 residencies. And more nights like last night than I can count. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone who had nothing to say. The quiet of someone who was listening at a level most people didn't. "You trained in the States?" he said. "Johns Hopkins. Then a fellowship in London. And you're here. Obviously. Why Seoul?" She turned to look at him fully for the first time that morning. "Why does that surprise you?" "It doesn't," he said. "I'm asking what brought you here specifically." "The hospital made an offer. The research program is strong. And I don't make decisions based on geography." She paused. "I make them based on where the work is." Something about that answer made him go quiet again. But this time it wasn't calculation. It was something closer to recognition. He extended his hand. "Han Seo-jun." "I know who you are," she said. She shook it anyway. Dr. Zainab Okoye. I know who you are too. They stood at the window for another few seconds. The city below them was filling in. Taxis, commuters, the slow mechanical groan of a morning in motion. Your employee is going to have a full recovery, she said. The next 24 hours are important, but the signs are good. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank the 11 years of training that made last night possible. He almost smiled. Almost. He pushed off the wall and turned to leave. Made it 3 steps before he stopped. You said the body tells you things before the machines do. He didn't turn around when he said it. Does that apply to people too? Not just patients. Zainab looked at the back of his head. Sometimes, she said carefully, but only when you're paying close enough attention. He nodded once and walked away. And Zainab stood at the window a full minute after he was gone, still holding the cold coffee, not drinking it, staring at the spot where he had been standing. Because something had just shifted in the air, and she was not yet sure if it was something she should pay attention to, or something she should walk away from before it grew. It started with a text, not a call, not a formal request through hospital administration. A text, sent at 10:14 p.m. on a Tuesday, from a number she didn't have saved. I have a question about long-term recovery timelines for blunt trauma cases. If you have 10 minutes this week, I'd like to ask it properly. She stared at the message for longer than she wanted to admit. She typed back, office hours are Monday and Wednesday, 2 to 4 p.m. The front desk can schedule you. He replied in under a minute. I was thinking somewhere that isn't a hospital. She put her phone face down on the counter. She picked it back up 40 minutes later and typed, Thursday, 7 p.m. There's a coffee place on 81 quiet enough to have a real conversation. He was already there when she arrived. Seated at a corner table, no phone in hand, jacket off, sleeves folded to the elbow. A plain black coffee in front of him. One across from it, hers, she realized. He had ordered without asking. She sat down and looked at the cup. How did you know what I drink? She asked. You were holding a black coffee at the window the other morning. No sugar. No cream. She wrapped both hands around the cup. You noticed that? I notice a lot of things. That's either impressive or concerning. Probably both, he said. The question he had texted about was real. He asked it. Something specific about cognitive recovery timelines in patients with cranial pressure complications. She answered it. He listened the way very few people listened, without filling the silence, without redirecting, without waiting for his turn to speak. He just absorbed what she said and then asked the next question from a place of genuine understanding. 40 minutes passed before either of them acknowledged that the coffee was nearly gone. You research your own employees' medical outcomes, she said. When they matter to the company's long-term function, yes. And when they matter to you personally? He looked at her across the table. He has a daughter, Seo Jun said. 8 years old. He coached her weekend football team before this happened. That matters to me. Zainab was quiet for a moment. That wasn't the answer she had been expecting from a man whose name was attached to billion-dollar decisions. He'll be back coaching in 8 weeks, she said. Tell him not to rush it. I will. They ordered more coffee. The conversation moved, from medicine to architecture to the specific way that Lagos and Seoul both built upward when they ran out of ground. She had grown up watching her father build things. He had grown up watching his father acquire them. They talked about the difference between those two things for 20 minutes without either of them realizing they were no longer talking about their fathers. By the time the cafe started stacking chairs around them, it was 9:40 p.m. Outside on the sidewalk, she pulled her coat on and he stood with his hands in his pockets, and neither of them moved toward their cars immediately. That was a good conversation, he said. It was, she agreed. A beat of silence. He almost said something. She could see it, the way his mouth opened slightly and then closed again. Whatever it was, he swallowed it back down. Same place next week? He asked instead. And Zainab, who had built her entire life around not making decisions carelessly, said yes, without hesitating. She told herself it was professional. An interesting mind. A useful connection. She was already wrong about that. And somewhere beneath the discipline and the precision, In the quiet place she rarely let anyone near, she knew it. She found out on a Wednesday. Not from him. That was the part that stayed with her long after everything else faded, that he hadn't told her. That she had learned it the way you learn something you were never supposed to know. Sideways, by accident, from a source that had no idea what it was handing her. It was a colleague. A fellow doctor, Dr. Imani Reeves, who had been at a medical charity gala the weekend before and mentioned it the way people mention things that seem harmless. Casually, between sips of tea in the break room, without looking up from her phone. I saw that businessman at the gala Saturday. The one whose employee you saved a few weeks ago. Hun something. I didn't realize he was engaged, his fiancée was there. Very put-together woman. They looked like a magazine cover honestly. Zainab was standing at the counter. She did not move. You okay? Imani asked, glancing up. Fine. Her voice was even. Completely even. She finished her coffee. Put the mug in the sink. Walked back to her office and closed the door. She sat down at her desk and stared at the wall for 3 minutes. Then she opened her laptop and typed his name. The results loaded in under 2 seconds. There were dozens of articles, but she only needed one. A business profile from 6 months ago. Toward the bottom, one line. A confirmed engagement to Choi Min-hee, daughter of Chairman Choi Dae-won. The union described as a natural alignment of two of South Korea's most influential families. She closed the laptop. She didn't cry. She didn't throw anything. She sat with the information the way she had learned to sit with a difficult diagnosis, still, honest, looking directly at what it was without softening it. He had never said the word relationship. He had never made a promise. But he had shown up. Kept showing up. Looked at her across coffee tables in ways that weren't professional. He had swallowed something back outside that cafe on Itaewon-ro and she had thought about it for 4 days afterward. And the whole time, there was someone else. She called him that evening. He answered on the second ring. Zainab. You're engaged, she said. A silence that told her everything. I was going to. Don't. Her voice didn't rise. That was what frightened her more than anger would have. The complete absence of it. I'm not interested in the explanation. I'm not interested in the timeline. I'm not interested in whatever version of this you had planned to tell me. Please let me. Han Seo-jun. She said his name the way you say something you are putting down and will not pick back up. Don't contact me again. She ended the call. She set her phone face down on the desk. And then she sat in the silence of her office, in a city she had chosen for the work, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The specific ache of something real being taken away before it ever had a name. She didn't move for a long time. And the worst part, the part she could not explain to anyone, could not write in a chart, could not diagnose or treat, was that somewhere across Seoul she knew he was sitting with his phone in his hand. And she knew he wasn't calling anyone. He was just sitting there. And somehow, that made it worse. Drop a comment right now, did Seo-jun wait too long to tell the truth? Or did Zainab deserve to hear it from him before any of this went this far? Tell me what you think below. The complaint was filed on a Thursday morning at 8:03 a.m. Anonymous. To precise. It cited 3 specific decisions Zainab had made during the night of the emergency: the bypassed protocol, the early surgical call, the imaging sequence she had reordered. On paper, each one looked like a deviation. Like someone who didn't follow the rules. Like a doctor who took risks she wasn't authorized to take. Whoever wrote it knew exactly which words to use. By 9 a.m., the hospital's internal review board had opened a preliminary inquiry. By 10 a.m., Zainab's department head had called her into his office with the kind of expression people wear when they are delivering news they wish someone else had to deliver. She sat across from him and read the complaint once. All the way through. Without expression. The board wants to review your decision log from that night, he said carefully. It's standard procedure when a complaint of this nature comes in. I know the procedure, she said. Zainab. I'll have the full documentation ready by end of day. She stood. Is there anything else? He looked at her with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite admiration. You're not going to fight this? I'm going to work, she said. That's what I do. She walked out of his office, down the corridor, and into the staff bathroom at the end of the hall. She stood at the sink and ran cold water over her wrists for 30 seconds. Not because she was falling apart, because she needed to feel something sharp and real before she walked back out there and faced 12 hours of people looking at her differently. The inquiry moved quietly through the hospital the way water moves through a wall. You don't see it, but everything starts to feel damp. Colleagues who used to stop by her office now gave her a half-second of eye contact in passing and kept moving. A senior resident who had asked to shadow her twice in the past month suddenly had a scheduling conflict. At lunch, the table she usually shared with 2 other doctors had 1 fewer chair pulled out when she arrived. None of it was loud. None of it was direct. But it was there. And Choi Min-hee, sitting in the back of a private car 12 kilometers away, received a 1-line update from the person she had hired to manage this quietly. Inquiry opened. Reputation impact in progress. She read it, set her phone down, and looked out the window at the city passing by with the expression of a woman who had just confirmed that a calculation was working exactly as designed. She had studied Zainab for months before making a single move. She knew her immigration status, her research grants, her hospital contract renewal date. She knew that Zainab had no family in Seoul, no powerful connections inside the hospital system, and no instinct for the kind of war that was fought with paperwork and whispers instead of confrontation. What Min-hee had not counted on, what she could not have known, was that Zainab Okoye had survived harder rooms than this one. She had walked into a hospital in a country that wasn't hers, built a reputation from nothing, and earned the fear and respect of people who had every reason to dismiss her. A complaint wasn't going to break that. But Min-hee wasn't trying to break her. She was setting the stage for something far more visible. Something public. Something that couldn't be quietly reviewed by a board and filed away in a cabinet. She wanted Zainab to lose, not her job, her dignity. And she had already chosen the place, the time, and the audience. The cafeteria was full when Min-hee walked in. Noon on a Tuesday. Peak hour. Long tables packed with nurses on break, residents grabbing food between rounds, administrators clustered near the windows. The noise was constant. Trays sliding, chairs scraping, overlapping conversations in 3 languages. Zainab was at a table near the center, seated across from Dr. Imani Reeves, unwrapping a sandwich she hadn't had time to eat the day before. She was mid-sentence about a patient chart when she heard the shift. Not a sound. A shift. The kind of quiet that moves through a crowd when something is about to happen and everyone senses it before they can name it. She looked up. Choi Min-hee was walking toward her table. Full makeup. Cream blazer. The posture of a woman who had dressed for exactly this moment. She moved through the cafeteria without looking at anyone else. Every step measured. Every eye in the room tracking her without meaning to. Imani's hands stopped moving under the table. Zainab set down her sandwich. Min-hee stopped 3 feet from the table and looked down at Zainab with an expression designed to read as composed from a distance but carried something sharp up close. "I think you know who I am," she said. Loud enough. Deliberately loud enough. The nearest table went quiet first. Then the next one. Zainab looked at her calmly. "I do." "Then you understand why I'm here." Min-hee's voice didn't waver. "You've been spending time with my fiancé. I think that deserves a conversation." A chair scraped somewhere. Someone put their fork down. Zainab stood up slowly. Not aggressively. Not defensively. The way a person stands up when they have decided they will not have this conversation from a seated position. "Whatever you think happened," Zainab said, keeping her voice even, "this is not the place." "I disagree," Min-hee said. "I think this is exactly the place." The room was almost completely silent now. Zainab picked up her tray. Prepared to walk. She had calculated the 12 steps to the exit, had already decided she would not give this woman an audience, when Min-hee reached out and grabbed her forearm. The tray tilted. The sandwich hit the floor. The drink went with it, ice scattering across the tile in a sound that cut through the silence like something breaking. Every person in that cafeteria stopped breathing at the same time. Zainab looked down at the hand on her arm. Then she looked up at Min-hee's face. And what she said next, she said quietly. So quietly that the people 2 tables away leaned forward without realizing they were doing it. "You just put your hand on me," Zainab said. Min-hee didn't release her grip immediately. In front of all these witnesses, Zainab continued, her voice the same low, deliberate register. "In a hospital. You just physically grabbed me." The hand dropped. But the damage, for Min-hee, had already been done in the wrong direction. Because 3 people at the nearest table already had their phones out. Not pointed at Zainab. Pointed at Min-hee. And the hospital security guard who had been near the entrance was already moving toward the center of the room, one hand on his radio. Min-hee had walked in expecting to expose someone. She had just exposed herself. And Zainab, still standing, untouched in every way that mattered, looked at her one final time before security arrived. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. With the quiet recognition of a woman who had just watched someone hand over every card they were holding. Whatever Min-hee had come here to destroy, she had only managed to destroy her own version of the story. And somewhere in the room, someone was still recording. The footage reached Seo-jun at 6:47 p.m. He was in his office on the 31st floor, working through a contract review he had been pushing back all week, when his head of security placed a tablet on the desk without a word and stepped back. Seo-jun looked at the man's face first. Then he looked at the screen. He watched the video once all the way through. No expression. No sound from him. Then he watched it again. He watched the moment Min-hee entered the cafeteria, the deliberate walk, the audience she had chosen, the way she positioned herself for maximum visibility. He watched her approach Zainab's table. He listened to every word, which the phone camera had captured more clearly than anyone would have expected. He watched Zainab stand. Watched her try to leave. And then he watched Min-hee grab her arm. He stopped the video. He sat back in his chair. The office was quiet in the way that floors this high are always quiet, removed from the city below, sealed off from anything uncontrolled. He had always liked this office for that reason. Nothing reached him up here unless he allowed it. He pressed play again. He watched the tray fall. The ice scatter. He watched Zainab look down at the hand on her arm and then look up, and he watched her face in that moment. Controlled. Precise. Like someone who had decided, in real time, exactly how much power she was and was not going to give away. He stopped the video again at the part where Zainab spoke. He didn't need to hear it again. He had already heard it twice. "You just put your hand on me." He set the tablet down on the desk. His head of security was still standing near the wall. The recording was taken by a resident on break. It's been shared in at least 2 private staff group chats that we know of. It hasn't hit public platforms yet, but that window is closing. Seo-jun nodded once. "And the investigation against Dr. Okoye?" he said. "The complaint that was filed last month." The pause. "We traced the origin. It came through a third-party filing service. The account was registered under a name that doesn't appear in any official records. But the billing address was connected to Min-hee's family office," Seo-jun said. It wasn't a question. Yes. He stood up from the desk. Walked to the window. 31 floors below, Seoul moved the way it always moved. Fast, lit, indifferent to whatever was happening in the rooms above it. He had been telling himself for months that he was handling this carefully. That he was waiting for the right moment. That the engagement would be dissolved properly, with the right conversations, with the right timing, with minimal damage to everyone involved. He had been lying to himself. Because careful wasn't what he had been. He had been slow. And slow had cost Zainab a complaint on her record, weeks of quiet isolation in her own workplace, and a moment in a cafeteria that she should never have had to endure. He turned from the window. 3 days until the wedding. He picked up his phone. Did not call Zainab. That wasn't what this moment required. This moment required something he had been postponing for too long. A decision. And for the first time in months, he made one without calculating the consequences first. The officiant said the word dearly and never got to finish the sentence. Seo-jun's voice came out flat and clear and completely without hesitation. Stop. The word landed in the ballroom like a stone dropped into still water. The ripple moved outward, from the altar, to the front rows, to the back of the room where the cameras were still rolling because nobody had thought to cut the feed yet. 500 people and not one of them made a sound. Min-hee's smile held for exactly 3 seconds. The practiced kind, the kind built for moments of pressure. But 3 seconds was all it had left in it, and then it began to come apart at the edges, a slight tightening around the eyes, a fractional shift in her jaw. Seo-jun, she said quietly. Just his name. A warning wrapped in 2 syllables. He turned to the officiant. Give us a moment. Then he looked back at Min-hee, and his voice, when he spoke, was the same voice he used in boardrooms when a deal had gone wrong and there was no longer any point in pretending otherwise. I know about the complaint, he said. Her chin lifted slightly. I know about the filing service. The account. The billing address. He paused. I know what you did to her. A murmur moved through the front rows. So, confused. The guests nearest the altar had caught enough words to know that something had shifted, but not enough to understand what. This is not the place, Min-hee said. Her voice was still steady, but her hands, her perfectly manicured, carefully folded hands, had tightened against each other. You walked into her hospital, Seo-jun said. You chose a room full of her colleagues. You grabbed her arm. He let that sit for a moment. You chose the most public place you could find. So did I. The murmur in the room grew. Someone near the back whispered something to the person beside them. A camera operator exchanged a look with his colleague and kept recording. Min-hee's composure, that extraordinary, constructed years-in-the-making composure, developed its first visible crack. Not tears. Nothing that soft. Something harder. The expression of a person who had engineered every variable in a situation and is watching one they missed walk straight through the center of everything. You would do this here, she said. In front of everyone. You did it in front of everyone, he said. You just chose a different room. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. The kind that presses down on the people sitting inside it. Seo-jun reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Set his mic quietly on the altar beside the officiant's book. And then he looked at Min-hee one last time, not with anger, not with satisfaction, with the exhausted clarity of a man who had been dishonest with himself for far too long and was finally done paying for it. I should have done this months ago, he said. I'm sorry I didn't. He stepped back from the altar. He walked down the aisle. 500 people watched him and not one of them moved. The cameras kept rolling. The flowers kept standing at their exact measured angles. $40,000 of ivory and white, perfect and untouched. And Min-hee stood at the altar alone, in a gown fitted 12 times, in front of everyone who had ever watched her perform the role of a woman who had everything under control. For the first time in her life, she had nothing left to perform. He stood at her door at 7:22 in the evening. No security. No car waiting at the curb. No prepared speech. Just Han Seo-jun in a dark jacket, standing in the hallway outside Zainab's apartment, holding nothing, looking like a man who had finally stopped calculating and had no idea what came next. He knocked once. 30 seconds passed. The door opened. Zainab stood in the frame in scrubs. She had just come off a 12-hour shift, and she looked it. Hair pulled back. Eyes clear and direct in the way they always were. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, fully, without flinching, without giving anything away before she was ready. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. Not immediately. I watched the footage, he said finally. All of it. The cafeteria. The moment she grabbed you. He stopped. I also found out who filed the complaint against your record. Zainab's jaw moved slightly. The smallest possible acknowledgement. I'm not here to ask you for anything, he continued. I'm not here to explain myself in a way that makes me look better than I was. I was slow. I told myself I was being careful and I was being slow. And that slowness cost you things it shouldn't have. A beat of silence. The inquiry, she said. My record. My legal team filed a full counter-disclosure with the hospital board this morning. The anonymous complaint has been formally connected to its source. The review board has already been notified. Your record will be cleared. She absorbed that without expression. I didn't come here for that, she said. I know. I don't need you to fix it. It was already being fixed, he said. Before I came here. Because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted it to buy me anything. She studied him for a long moment. The hallway was quiet. Somewhere below them, the city hummed at its usual frequency, indifferent, constant, unbothered by the specific weight of this specific moment. What do you want, Seo-jun? He held her gaze. I don't know yet, he said. And it was the most honest thing he had said in months, maybe years. I know that I ended something that should have been ended a long time ago. I know that I handled things in a way I'm not proud of. And I know that whatever this was, what started in that hospital hallway, what grew in that cafe on Itaewon-ro, it was the most real thing in my life during a period when nothing else was. Zainab leaned against the door frame. Not opening it wider. Not closing it either. Real isn't the same as right, she said quietly. No, he agreed. It isn't. Another silence. This one longer. The kind two people sit inside when they are both doing the same honest math. I'm not the same woman I was 8 months ago, she said. I don't mean that as a warning. I mean it as a fact. Whatever you think you remember, I've moved through something since then. And I'm not interested in going back to the beginning of it to make it easier for someone else to understand. I'm not asking you to go back, he said. I'm asking if there's a forward. She looked at him for a long time. The door stayed exactly where it was, half open, half closed, holding the question in the air between them like something neither of them was ready to put down yet. I have an early shift tomorrow, she said finally. I know. And I don't make decisions when I'm tired. Neither do I, he said. Not anymore. She looked at him one last time. And for just a moment, one unguarded, unscripted moment, something moved through her expression that wasn't quite forgiveness and wasn't quite distance. It was something in between. Something that didn't have a clean name yet but was clearly, undeniably alive. She stepped back from the door. She didn't invite him in. She didn't close it either. Good night, Seo-jun, she said, and walked back into the apartment, leaving the door open behind her by exactly the width of a question. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved, just barely. The closest thing to a smile he had allowed himself in months. And he turned and walked back down the hallway knowing that what came next wasn't going to be easy, wasn't going to be fast, and wasn't going to look anything like the life he had spent 34 years building. But for the first time in longer than he could name, it felt like something worth building toward. Because choosing truth is one thing. Proving you deserve what comes after it is another thing entirely. And that battle, the quiet, daily, unglamorous work of becoming someone worthy of a second chance, was only just beginning. If this story moved you, if Zainab's strength, Seo-jun's reckoning, or the cost of staying silent too long hit something real in you, drop a comment below and tell us what moment stayed with you the most. Your words might be exactly what someone else in this community needs to hear today. And if you are new here, subscribe right now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story on this channel. Every week we bring you narratives that don't just entertain, they challenge how you think about power, love, integrity, and what it truly costs to do the right thing. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. You never know whose day you might change. The next story is coming. And trust, you do not want to miss it.